once you become aware of these 8 kinds of waste, it's almost impossible to not see them, like cannot unsee all of this stuff. And once you get these categories of, oh, there's something moving back and forth electronically in paper files. Oh, that's transportation. You have a framework for thinking about these things and a way to categorize these things and a way to think about, okay, is that something that we actually can reduce or eliminate, or does that need to be in there for some reason?
You're listening to the Legal Mastermind Podcast with your hosts Ryan Klein and Chase Williams, the go-to podcast for learning from the experts in the legal community about effective ways to grow and manage your law firm.
So today on the Legal Mastermind Podcast, we have Kathryn McDonough. She's former in-house counsel. She is a professor. She appears on several of the National Law Journal's best of. Her whole world revolves around consulting, teaching. We're super grateful to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
And so can you tell us a little bit more about your background? We were briefly saying, you've done so many interesting things. You've taught on so many various subjects.
Sure. Well, my ancient history is that I got out of law school and had the very rare opportunity to work in-house rather than a law firm, and almost instantly became interested in things like efficiency and client service and how to collaborate and that sort of thing. And my path took me from there to working at Counsel Connect, which was an online startup and a joint venture between American Lawyer Media, which is now ALM, and Time Warner. And that is where I met what were the very first law firm marketing professionals in law firms. And I thought, okay, that is what I really want to do when I grow up, because I had been all these different things, event planning, concert promoter, working in advertising, law school. And I thought, this is a really great way to bring all my seemingly random experiences to bear. So I worked inside of several law firms in a marketing and business development capacity, built business development training and coaching programs from the ground up. And at my last law firm, finally had the chance to really dig into my interest in process improvement. I went and got my Six Sigma Green Belt, and then lamented the fact that it took me probably 10 to 12 months to bridge what I had learned in that course to things that were relevant and to the way that law was actually practiced and in the business of law as well. And I kind of kept saying to a friend of mine, why isn't anyone teaching this in our context so that it is immediately useful and relevant? Because no one has time to do all this bridging. And over a period of time, she heard me say it often enough that she finally just sort of put her hand up and said, please stop talking about it. Either go do it and build it yourself, or you have to stop. And I sort of said, all right, then I'm gonna. And I did. And that was really the beginning of the Legal Lean Sigma Institute. And so all of our courses, programs, workshops, materials, and our consulting work is done with law firms, law departments, law offices, legal aid, and of course their business clients as well.
So talking about Six Sigma, I mean, this is a set of tools that's been successful for thousands, if not tens of thousands of corporations for over the past few decades. And are there any things that kind of stand out about your approach to doing it as it applies to law firms?
Sure. Such a great question. And one that we actually get a lot, because it's hard to imagine how something that came out of Motorola and was designed for manufacturing could work in our world, which is really a lot of brain work. And any lawyer will tell you we're not manufacturing widgets here. So taking the idea of Six Sigma thinking, which is something that lawyers are really good at, and the business professionals who work with them are really good at, thinking about what are the key inputs and other factors that affect our outputs and our outcomes. What's the best way we know how to do something, and how can we increase our probability of a positive outcome, and not to just gratuitously standardize anything, but to consider what are the benefits of varying degrees of consistency and standardization. So all of that could be applied to the law, and Six Sigma is particularly helpful for highly repetitive processes where quality and accuracy are of paramount importance. And when we combine Six Sigma with Lean, which came out of Toyota, which is really about doing the right things and simplifying processes and so that they are faster and simpler. When we combine Lean, do the right things, with Six Sigma, which is do those things right, that really adds up to how we define efficiency, which is not a very simple do more with less. That could be the right answer, but it's not necessarily the right answer. So for us, efficiency is figure out the right things to do, Lean, and then do those things right, which is Six Sigma, and then layer on project management, which is do the right things the right way the first time, every time. That's what gets us efficiency.
So I guess this really all revolves around creating a competitive advantage for law firms and developing this competitive advantage. So besides, of course, enrolling in your program, how would a lawyer really get started? Should they start reading into each of these techniques individually? What's the best way to sort of get your foot in the door?
Clearly, there's no one right way to do any of this. And actually, one of the things that we're really known for at the Legal Lean Sigma Institute is picking the right approach and the right combination of methodologies and tools for the situation at hand. And so certainly I applaud reading and going to programs and listening to podcasts such as this. It's a great way to kind of dip your toe in the water, but there's nothing like actually just doing it and trying it. And even better if you're doing so in a collaborative way with clients. And we have lots of examples of firms that have offered educational programming, workshops, and even done projects together. We have a whole case study, an award-winning case study of something we call the legal workout. So whether it's just getting a cross-functional team of people together to actually map out a process where everybody's seeing it from end to end for the first time, or doing a full-scale, very sophisticated project that reaches all four corners of the organization. The most important thing is just to try some of these things, because different approaches and different tools work for different organizations.
Speaking of that, different organizations, I'd imagine that doing the Lean Six Sigma for law firms, doing it for, some of the larger firms, talking about hundreds or thousands of lawyers, a lot of the stuff would apply. But as you get kind of a smaller organization, maybe hundreds and even like dozens, does it still completely or comprehensively apply? Or
totally
it does? Oh, so you would still like use the whole comprehensive. It wouldn't like maybe just like cherry pick what works. So you could still apply the whole thing is what you're saying.
Yeah, all of these things are completely scalable. And I'll just share with you, our smallest client ever had 12 people in their firm, not 12 lawyers, but 12 people total. And the beauty of doing process improvement work is we might pick different tools, but we always use the same framework. And it's the framework that's used by process improvers everywhere in every industry. And it's called DMAIC, which is just the framework for how we move through a project. And it stands for define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And there are variations on this. There's a design version of it, but those are kind of the basic steps. And there's so much change management built into that framework, so much communication that, and if we move through that framework and we don't skip steps and we put together a cross-functional team, you almost can't go wrong. It's tried and true.
One question that I have is, what's the best, is there any sort of like assessment or an easy way for a law firm to kind of reflect on how efficient or kind of gauge how important implementing something like this is, like how urgent it may be or how much it may impact them in a positive way?
There are a couple of tools that we use, and one of them is called a P+ scorecard that allows organizations to just do a little bit of a self-assessment. Sometimes we'll be part of that to help them kind of get on the same page about where they are in their organizational development. And then in terms of deciding where to focus their process improvement efforts, we'll typically ask questions like, what are our drivers for things like efficiency, for excellent quality of work and service? And those are both internal drivers and external drivers. Where do we have a really pressing need for high probability of successful outcomes? Where do we really need to get things accurate and predictable? And so we'll be looking at both legal processes and business processes inside of our organization. So typically we'll inquire as to where is work at a high volume, where is the trend increasing or declining, where are we experiencing pricing pressure, high write-offs, write-downs, where are we asking for those things or giving those things, what's paper intensive or very form driven, what seems to be taking longer than it should or causing pain points or frustration for people, because we say all the time, process improvement is an excellent forum for pent-up grievances. So if we can make things better for people, usually we're hiring very talented people. And if they're complaining about something, it's usually because there's something not working in the process. Also, you mentioned the competitive advantages. To me, that's the whole reason to do this work. So we want to examine where we have opportunities and demands to expand our capacity and or our capability to handle particular types of work. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, because we always start with this, what are our clients saying? What are they asking us for or even demanding? Taking a look at what's coming in the RFPs, RFIs. What are they putting in their outside counsel guidelines? Because even if you don't ask your clients directly, they still speak to us plenty in the way that they act and the documentation they already provide to us. So all of those things are the kinds of questions that we will typically ask when we're getting started.
So once you've identified some of these gaps, what do you consider some wasteful activities to reduce?
Well, looking through a lean lens, lean as part of the methodology seeks to reduce, if not eliminate, these 8 kinds of what are called waste. And when we use the term waste, we don't mean we're just going to throw it away. We mean when we identify these things in a process, it becomes a candidate for reduction, if not outright elimination. So they are the 8 kinds of waste spell downtime. We have a lot of acronyms just like everybody else. So the downtime is defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, and extra processing steps. So very quickly, one at a time, defects are anything that's not done right the first time, plus anything needed to correct or get it right. So even things like draft, review, revise, we would consider that a defect, a number of them. Overproduction is when you simply do too much of something. It could be starting work before clearing conflicts, copying too many people on an email, just doing too much of something. Waiting is part of every single process. And if we could squeeze all the waiting out of our processes, by definition, they're going to be simpler, faster processes.
Is that all is that all from memory, or you have a list? Because that's very
no.
Impressive.
Everybody who does this for a living, we can talk about DMAIC and downtime until this is like 101 stuff.
Yeah, that was impressive. Yeah, you listed like 12 or 15 things in a row, and I'm like, man, I can't remember that many steps or that many factors that have to do with anything. So that's very cool.
Well, I've been teaching it for a long time.
Yeah.
And there's just so many of these kinds of waste in our processes. It's almost, once you become aware of these 8 kinds of waste, it's almost impossible to not see them, like cannot unsee all of this stuff. And once you get these categories of, there's something moving back and forth electronically in paper files. Oh, that's transportation. You have a framework for thinking about these things and a way to categorize these things and a way to think about, okay, is that something that we actually can reduce or eliminate, or does that need to be in there for some reason? But we learn to flag these things as candidates. And then, we think about, does that really even need to be in there? There's so many things in our processes that we never would have included them if we were designing it from the ground up. But because, person A started it, and then person B inherited what person A started and then added their own things in, and then person C had that one time there was a workaround, and then that becomes the way we're doing things. We just basically create these weird patchworks of in our processes where when we stop and take a look at them, how we're currently doing the work, which is what process improvement is. How are we currently doing this work? People are often shocked at how bad things are, how much waste there is in the process.
So when you're doing Six Sigma, even though it's kind of like a collection of tools or techniques, it still helps people on the team kind of adopt like better habits or be able to naturally see the gaps or flaws that happen in their processes?
It definitely does. And not only that, but it provides common language for people to be able to talk with each other. And it creates these conditions to not only make sure that we actually stay focused on a flow of value to our clients, but it creates a really safe and productive way for people to have conversations about, instead of, that's just the way we do things around here, or, inspiring what can be a defensive response. It just creates this culture where people are always asking what's going well and what can be improved. And that is the value of having Lean Sigma plus introducing good project management models and skill sets. It just becomes, that's the way we do things around here. That's a continuous improvement mindset.
So once you've identified these processes or needs for improvement, what do you find is the most effective way to document and sort of keep organized?
To me, the single most effective thing that people can do is get a group together that's a cross-functional team, meaning representing different stakeholders in the process, different perspectives, different backgrounds, different touch points in the process, different activities in the process, and get them together with nothing but a huge blank wall, a massive amount of sticky notes and markers all the way around, medium point markers, and get them to write down every single task that they do in that process, one task per Post-it note, and then go step by step and put it all up on the wall. I mean, there are different kinds of process maps that we create, but there is nothing more powerful than actually seeing the whole thing from start to finish all at once. That's the best beginning of all.
So once you have that final deliverable, is there like a master like Google document, or is like a big, thing you print out? What's like the most, or maybe there's like pieces of software you can use? Like, what are your recommendations there?
Oh gosh, there's tons of really good project management software for sure. It really depends on, I'm a fan of not buying anything new. So we just try to use whatever is available to us. And so for some firms, they might be highly sophisticated in their technology, and we might have all sorts of things available to us, process mapping software and, even proprietary systems. But at the end of the day, it's not about the form, it's about the function. And so I have clients that basically don't really move things off of flip charts, and we just take pictures and we pop them in something like Dropbox, and that's how they keep their stuff. Usually one person on our team is assigned to be the project manager. And so at the very beginning of doing this work, we'll decide how we're going to create our repository for whatever the project is. We decide things like file naming conventions and subject lines and who's going to have access to this, and how are we going to structure the file folders, and we get all of that set up at the very beginning, and that way everybody knows, and we get more efficient in the terms of how we're working together because of that. So again, no one right way to do things. I'm all for really elaborate stuff. There are a lot of people using things like, Basecamp and Slack and Trello, and there's a lot of really good options available. But from my perspective, I just try to stay agnostic because there are a lot of good options.
I think at the beginning of our conversation, you said that there isn't like any particular one way to get started. Is that kind of what we were discussing? But once people do get started, is there any flexibility on like who on the team is going to participate, the timeline, the amount of resources you commit? Like is there any flexibility or different ways of adopting this as a whole, or is that a pretty tried and true, like there's a specific way to kind of implement it correctly?
So let's take the first thing first. So the project team itself is typically comprised of 6 to 8 people. We will do a kind of a rough stakeholder analysis to make sure that the people we would call the priority stakeholders, the people who are most likely to be affected by any work on the process or change in the process, they have to be represented on that team. And we need to pick somebody who has some political capital, somebody who's respected, somebody who can communicate. But we really want a diverse team, not just cross-functional, but diverse in terms of how they think, how they communicate, how they operate. So that team of 6 to 8 priority stakeholders is going to be the project team. We usually have a project leader, we have a project facilitator, which is usually my role, and we have a project manager. And that team, for the duration of the process improvement project, if we're doing define, measure, analyze, improve, control, we might do an accelerated version of that called a Kaizen, which allows us to deliver a tightly scoped project in 4 to 6 months typically, or we might do something longer, 12 to 14 months. And that's for maybe larger projects that touch all the corners of the firm, such as timekeeping, for example, for a business process. But the team should expect to spend about 20% of their time overall while working on this project. It's going to be, dedicated to those activities. And then there's a small team of usually between 3 and 5 decision makers who comprise what we call the steering committee. And the project team meets with the steering committee. And this is one of the reasons the DMAIC framework works so well, is we have what are called toll gates or gate reviews, where we demonstrate to the steering committee that the project team has produced very specific required deliverables in each phase. And they approve our work, they review it. We have a lot of really good discussions. It's an opportunity to course correct, check our thinking, etc., with the steering committee, and we get their permission and approval before we move on to the next phase. So there's all this change management built into it, but the steering committee typically spends a total of 10 hours on these gate reviews and these meetings throughout the course of a project. So all this is one of the reasons why at the very beginning, we put together a business case. What is the value that we think as our cross-functional team of doing this project? And we have to be able to convince ourselves and the steering committee that we've got a real issue that we're tackling that's worthy of allocating these resources to. And if we're unable to convince ourselves in the steering committee, unlike other scenarios where you just do the project regardless, in the way we work is if it's not worthy, we don't do the project. We recommend we move on to something else. Usually the projects that we undertake will return millions of dollars on investment, some of them tens of millions of dollars. So we typically don't tackle something where we will not get a substantial return on the investment for having those people involved, as well as any expenditures made for improving the process itself, whether that is related to training or technology, policy changes, and so forth.
Well, definitely can't overlook anything that may save your firm millions or tens of millions of dollars, I'd say. So
that's for sure. You know what, though, on that note, I just might add this, that we often underestimate how incremental improvements can actually add up to quite a lot of time savings and money savings. So it can really be those little things. If you have the incremental improvements, I mean, 1% improvement, as they say, every day adds up to a whole lot of improvement at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of begin doing our outro. And at this point, of course, again, we appreciate your time coming on here and speaking passionately about what you do, and you help obviously a lot of law firms with Six Sigma and the lean and everything in between. Didn't mean to rhyme there, but yeah. And then as far as
well done.
There it is. So if people want to learn more, if they want to look at some materials and maybe some additional information to get just a better idea of maybe how it can improve what they have going on right now, what are some resources that they can navigate to? And then after that, how can they get in touch with you directly?
Please come join us at legalleansigma.com. And same thing on Twitter. You'll find us on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. And we do have some really good resources available on our site in terms of articles and an excerpt from one of the things that I wrote, which is Lean Six Sigma for Law Firms. And those are available. Those are complimentary resources, podcasts like this. And we would love to hear from people. What are you interested in working on? If you're looking for a particular example or case study, we're pretty good at finding them for you, because we want to help you make the case for doing this work.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Legal Mastermind podcast. If you're interested in working with Ryan and Chase, please email mastermind@marketmymarket.com. Make sure to join the free mastermind group for growing and managing your firm at lawfirmmastermind.com. Ryan Klein and Chase Williams are the managing partners at Market My Market, one of the top legal marketing companies in the United States.